I talk a lot about what Presbyterians and Reformed Christians believe. But does that mean you have to agree with everything to be a member of a Presbyterian church? Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Monday, August 4th, 2025. This week I'm talking about some of the paradoxes and polarities we encounter in the Christian faith. Today I want to talk about a polarity we Presbyterians recognize in our official documents. The polarity itself is certainly not unique to Presbyterian and Reformed churches, but we at least bring it into the open and recognize it for what it is. The polarity concerns the extent to which individual believers may differ in their beliefs and still remain part of the same body of Christ. Our Book of Order, the portion of our Constitution in the Presbyterian Church USA that deals with matters of church government, has a section written in the late 1700s called Historic Principles of Church Order. Several of these principles are stated as polarities that our tradition has long recognized. Today we take on the first of these polarities. Tomorrow we'll take a look at a second set. One of the bedrock principles of Presbyterianism, at least in America, concerns the individual's freedom of conscience. Many Presbyterians, especially those of us who play in the church sandbox every day, know this one by heart. Quoting the Westminster Confession of Faith, it begins, "God alone is Lord of the conscience, and hath left it free from the doctrines and commandments of men which are in anything contrary to his word, or beside it in matters of faith or worship." It then continues, "Therefore we consider the rights of private judgment in all matters that respect religion as universal and unalienable. We do not even wish to see any religious constitution aided by the civil power, further than may be necessary for protection and security, and at the same time be equal and common to all others." Well, so far so good, but in the very next paragraph it says that in perfect consistency with the above principle of common right, every Christian church or union or association of particular churches is entitled to declare the terms of admission into its communion and the qualifications of its ministers and members, as well as the whole system of its internal government by which Christ hath appointed, that in this exercise of this right they may, notwithstanding, err in making the terms of communion either too lax or too narrow, yet even in this case they do not infringe upon the liberty or rights of others, but only make an improper use of their own. In other words, individuals are free to believe whatever their own conscience dictates, but churches are also free to set the limits of what its members and especially its officers may and may not believe. Two things need to be said about this for it to make good sense. First, and this is a historical piece, there was a time in the history of the church when church doctrine was enforced by civil authorities. People could be fined, physically punished, or even in extreme cases, executed for holding dissenting opinions. This sort of thing even took place among early Reformed churches. But by the time the Westminster Confession was written in the middle of the 1600s, there was beginning to be a movement away from civil enforcement of church doctrine. And then, of course, when the United States was coming into being, this principle became more firmly entrenched. The whole idea of a separation of church and state, which some in our country want to see torn down, was actually to ensure that people could believe according to the dictates of their own conscience without threat of punishment by civil government. So, the first part of this polarity has to do with the freedom of belief. So how do we square this freedom of belief with the power of churches to set boundaries on what members may and may not believe? It's actually very simple. You and I are under absolutely no compulsion to belong to this or any other particular church, and there are no civil punishments attached to non-membership. In other words, the church, like any other voluntary association, can exclude people on the basis of belief because no one is required to belong to the church. It is therefore not an infringement on anyone's conscience to be excluded from the membership of the church. Tomorrow, a similar polarity in Presbyterian belief. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.